Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to taxation for the second semester. I hope you're all doing well. Let me quickly just stop sharing my screen and see if I can put on my camera so that those of you that have not met me before can actually see me. So hi, everyone. Let's see if you can see my camera. Yes. Okay, so hi, everyone. My name's Astrid, and I'll be your lecturer for the semester. My background, just to give you a little bit of background where I come from. So I studied in Pretoria and I finished my BCom Accounting Sciences degree and then did my honors in Accounting Sciences and then went on to specialize specifically in tax for small businesses and did my master's where I looked specifically at the turnover tax system and do small businesses actually know about it or not. So that's just a little bit about me. I'm going to switch off my webcam again so that it doesn't take too much data, but at least you can put a face with the name for now, and then when I see you in face to face, it's not the first time you actually see me. Okay, so let's start with today's session. So today's session will be broken up in two parts. We are going to start off with just a quick few house rules, and then we're going to focus on the introduction of taxation. All of you had research you had to do in order to answer the questions for today. So we're going to discuss that. And then in the second session, we're going to start looking at value-added tax and the ins and outs about it that you need to know. If there's something that's unclear or you didn't hear me the first time, please just in the chat function, just let me know, or if you want, just put on your mic and then just stop me or raise your hand. Then I'll repeat what I said because we don't always know with the connectivity if you guys are always with us or not. So just let me know and then I'll just repeat or clarify whatever you need me to do. Okay, so this is just my email address where you can contact me. That is my husband and my little baby. She's almost a year old now. So I know some of you also have siblings, so you might have your own children depending on your age. My class availability, or when I'm available generally on campus and online, is on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. But that doesn't mean I'm not available during the week. So you can send me an email if you've got any questions. And if I'm on leave or out of office, I will generally put it out of office on there and I'll let you know generally the week before just so that you're aware of it. Okay. So just a few things to note. Your timetable currently only shows your collab and face-to-face sessions. For the next 2 weeks, it's going to be on online classes. And then after that, they will look at your number of classes and then go redivide them 50% face-to-face, 25 collab, and then 25 LACs. The LAC activities I will load on to VC Learn for you. And then those activities you can do when you have time. So you need to schedule time for this subject. We have 4 sessions that you need to do. So when you have time, just go do it. And some of them will include your ICE tasks as well for this module. Then the prescribed textbook is your student's approach to the income tax. Please make sure you get the 2021 edition because the tax amounts do change. If you've got a 2020 edition, just make sure that you go update, for example, the tax table information in your textbook and make sure you've got the correct percentages. There wasn't a lot of changes from last year. There were a few. So if you've got the prior year textbook, that is also perfect. Most of the information would still be the same. Then any material that you are looking for, I will load the slides on VC Learn for you guys. And then under the more resources is where I will load any ICE task information or LAC activities. Okay, so this is just similar to the first semester. just how we split the teaching and learning module for the semester is 50% will be face-to-face, 25 will be your online collab, and 25 will be your LACs. It's been adjusted slightly due to the fact with our current level and the fact that BC wasn't sure whether we were allowed to do face-to-face, so that's why we're doing 2 weeks collab, and then we'll implement this again. My expectations from you guys specifically for the semester is make sure you attend class. We do not have a lot of contact sessions, but there is, however, a lot of content we need to cover. Let me quickly just do a poll. I just want to see how many of you have actually done this subject before. Yes, you can speak. Angaliso, you are welcome to put on your mic. Okay, so based on the majority of the responses, you guys, most of you have had tax before. For the guys that have not had this module before, there is a lot of content to get through, and because of the fact that we only have a certain amount of sessions, I'm going to focus more on the practical aspects. So what I do expect of you is to come prepared for class. I will let you know what pre-reading I require for the session we will do, so that you guys can at least go through the theoretical content, so that when we talk about specific things in class, that you are on top of it and you understand where I'm coming from. And then we will also assign specific homework questions that I want you to go through. So it's questions in your textbook that explain specific content really well. And I find it's a lot better for some students if they go through it themselves, because then it makes sense and then they can see where they specifically struggle and they can ask me specific questions. So in class, I will generally look more generically what students tend to struggle with, but there might be something specific for you as an individual which someone else might not be struggling with that you would like me to clarify. So that's why we do the homework, do the pre-prepared reading and stuff like that. Then the LAC and ICE activities, I will mainly try and get old paper questions or more difficult questions for you to work through in those activities to make sure we also start prepping you for your tests that are coming up. I want you to ask questions. Tax for most students is a difficult subject. If you understand it, it's great, but there's a lot of students that don't. And if you understand the rules, you can actually do really well in this module. You can pass it. You don't have to worry about the fact that you will fail it, but you need to understand the application to be able to do well in this module. I know a lot of you just want to get 50%. That's fine. But what I normally advise is at least aim for 60, so that if something goes wrong in a test or an exam, then you can still pass your module at the end of the year. Okay, and I want you to have fun. So this is a very practical module. You will be able to use this if you run a business. You'll be able to use this in your practice. If you as an individual start earning a salary, you will be able to use this and apply this in completing your tax return. So what's nice about this module is it is something that you can actually use in your own life. Then you don't have to pay an accountant or a tax specialist to do your tax return for you. You will already know the basics. So this is why I love this module. Okay, before I move on, what is your expectations from this module? You can just type there in the chat function. So what do you expect from me as your lecturer for the semester? Just so that when I prepare the slides and stuff, that I just know what I need to aim for. I'm just going to repeat if you haven't heard me. Okay, so Petunia wants a steady pace. So Petunia, does that mean you rather we do a little less, a bit slower, or would you want us to go slightly faster, that we cover more work? What do you define as a steady pace? Okay, so a lot of you want us to help us pass. Well, that is what I'm going to do, Lingelo. Assessment type questions so that we're fully prepared for tests and exams. Okay, Estienne, that's normally what I try and do in the class as well. I will also arrange a workshop closer to those tests where we then do a test type question. For example, if it's a 60-minute test, we'll do a 60-minute question paper and we'll go through it to help you understand. Okay, so Petunia said rather a bit slower to ensure understanding. Okay, that's fine. Karabo says know how to answer test questions in exams, especially calculation. Sure. Okay, so I'll make sure that when we do a question, I'm going to give you time to work on the question in class so that you can see what you don't understand, and then we will discuss the solution and I'll show you how to approach it. What did you have to see in the question? Because I find a lot of students in a test, they miss specific key items and then they either can't do the question or they lose easy marks. So I'm also going to do a bit of exam technique during the semester to help you get the maximum amount of marks in the minimum amount of time. That's generally how we approach a tax question, is try and get the easy marks first and then focus on the more difficult aspects to make sure that you pass. And if you want to do really well, then we focus on the more complex stuff. Okay, so let's continue then. Now we're going to start with learning unit 1, which is your introduction to tax. Now you will see on your module outlines that they've loaded over the weekend, there is actually no prescribed text for that specific chapter. But if you look in your prescribed textbooks in chapter 1, they do have an introduction, but that focuses more on your tax tables and how to calculate your taxable income, which we are going to link more with learning unit 3 onwards. So then we will go back to chapter 1. So the introduction to tax is to explain where does tax come from, and they do actually ask these questions sometimes in a paper, so that's why I wanted us to at least look at this. So for this learning module, our outcomes is to describe the South African tax system. So how does the South African tax system work? How does the budget process work? What is the role of SARS? And then explain how income tax law is interpreted. So how does the tax law actually work? Then we identify the impact of regulation, practice notes, interpretation notes. So that links into the previous bullet point. Then we need to explain what is the implications for residents versus non-residents. Now, the reason that is important is when we start calculating the income tax or the taxable income, there are different rules for a resident versus a non-resident, and that's why you need to understand the difference. And then distinguish between your direct and indirect taxes. So we're going to briefly look at those and what is the difference, and then distinguish between progressive, regressive, and proportional tax. Okay, so that's the different types of tax modules that you will generally see. Okay, now before we start, how would you define tax to one of your friends that aren't studying tax at all? How would you explain it to them in layman terms? You can either pick up your mic if you prefer, or you can type in the chat box. Either is allowed. So I'm just going to repeat the question. How would you define tax? Okay, so the first one is government taking money from us. Okay, that is, you on the right track. Yes, so government takes money from us, money you owe SARS. Okay, so those two actually go hand in hand. Yes. A portion of your income that you have to give to the government. Okay, yes. Let me rephrase that. How would you determine what money you need to pay over to SARS or the portion from your income? How do you think they determine that? A portion of a person's income which is collected by a tax collection authority in order to provide services to the community. Okay, so Estienne, yes, you're starting to elaborate on what your colleagues have said previously. Yes, so we use that money they collect in order to provide services to the community. Okay, so let's quickly look at what is the key things when we talk about tax. Unfortunately, it's generally a compulsory contribution or fee. So no one in this country will get away from paying tax ever. So the reason I say that is you can either pay direct taxes on your salary, or you can pay indirect taxes, for example, VAT on items that you buy. So it doesn't matter if you are rich or if you are poor, everyone in the country will contribute towards the tax of the country in some shape or form. But depending on your status, it will depend on how much money you will contribute at the end of the day. So someone that, for example, earns a basic salary would generally contribute more towards the indirect taxes like that, and not necessarily contribute to your personal income tax, whereas your richer folk will generally then also contribute personal income tax. They might have a company, so they might contribute paying company income tax. They might pay dividends tax if they pay out dividends from their companies. So they might have a bigger variety of taxes where they contribute. Then it is levied by the government, like you guys said. And it is generally on products, income, or profit. So it depends on what type of tax we have on what it will be levied. So the first thing, it can be on a product, so something we sell, like that. It can be on your income, so that might be pay as you earn. It can be, and profits would be your company profits. We would pay companies income tax. And like you guys said, it's used to deliver basic services. So that is the basic services that the government are responsible for. They collect that money in order to deliver basic services. Okay, so now this was based on the research you guys had to do for me. So the first question is, what is the purpose of the taxation? We sort of answered it already, but why do you think we have tax? Okay, so Estienne says the most important purpose of taxation is to enable public services to provide service and to support the community where it is needed by raising revenue. Yes, so that's correct. Is there anyone else that want to contribute to what Estienne has said? Is there anyone that wants to add or elaborate on what Estienne said regarding what is the purpose of tax? Okay, so Pamela says to fund government spending. Yes, that's also correct. So government spending generally is supposed to be in order to provide those services for the communities that they are responsible for. So that's correct. Anyone else? Okay, so Christine says to breach the gap between the rich and poor. Okay, so it's not necessarily breaching the gap, but I get what you're saying is we rather take more money from the richer folk to help support the poorer guys. So if you see it in that way, yes, we can say it's to breach the gap because we are taking money from the richer guys to try and support the poor guys for the benefits provided to the citizens and the residents. So yes, so all of you are correct. We do take the money based on a sliding scale, so the more you earn, the more tax you pay, and we use it to provide services. Okay, so Petunia says all community benefit, not just the poor. Okay, so that's correct, Petunia. We can't not benefit all the communities. So let's take, for example, public roads. If we only did roads for certain communities, then you would not be able to transport food from your main hubs to your smaller communities, for example. So at the end of the day, that money that is collected is for the benefit of all South Africans, but specific services. But what they generally do is a lot of those funds that were collected would go to your poorer communities, specifically for like basic education, health care, and stuff like that. So they do contribute to everyone in South Africa. Because if they don't do that, what will happen is your higher earner guys will get upset and they will, most of them, what they do is they will move overseas, or alternatively, what they do is they start evading taxes and taking money under the table and stuff like that. Okay, I see what Mangaliso is saying there. So I'm not going to comment on that, but okay. Okay, so what's the next question that we have is what is the role of SARS? So why do you think SARS has been appointed in South Africa? Okay, so ASEAN thinks SARS is South African Tax Collection Authority, who are responsible for administration of the SA tax system and the custom services which it provides. Okay, Alzan says they collect and administer all national taxes, duties, and levies. So both of you are correct. So the main role of SARS is to make sure that that revenue that government needs for their government spending, that money is collected. So they are basically in charge for ensuring that that money comes in, but also administrating the admin around collection of taxes and taxing the appropriate people. So that is basically what SARS is responsible for. Okay. Then I want you to describe the budgeting process. How would you describe that? Okay, Taboko just added another comment in there to say performance functions in the most cost efficient and effective manner. Okay, so Tebogo, what you're saying is correct. However, it does not always work like that in practice. As much as we would love SARS or any tax collection agency to be cost efficient and effective, it does not always happen like that in practice. So that is the aim, but because of limitations, whether it's technology, whether it's economical or political things in the background or the environment they're in, there's generally some other challenges as well, which sometimes makes or causes our tax collection agencies to not be as efficient or cost effective as they could be. So that is the ideal, but it doesn't always work like that in practice. Okay, but we hope that in a few years' time they will actually get to that. Okay, so ma'am, the questions were 5 marks. Would we get 5 marks for simply indicating they're a tax collection authority? To be honest with you, Miller, I don't actually know what the suggested solution is. So what they generally give marks for that type of question is to say they collect, they administrate the taxes and duties, and then yeah, I don't know what else they would actually. You are correct. There was 5 marks. I will have a think and I'll get back to you regarding what else they might have looked at. But I'm going to discuss these as well a little later. So I've also prepared the class or some notes for you guys. So we'll just park that question and see if I've got something else on my slides as well that addresses that. But otherwise, I'll get back to you. I have asked them to provide us with solutions for the questions in the workbook so that we can make sure we prep you guys appropriate. Okay, so Magdalene said protection against the illegal importation and exportation of goods. Okay, so yes, they also protect us against imports and exports, and that is also part of the customs and exports thing. Yes, so Kuhatso says to facilitate trade. So yes, they do facilitate trade, and that actually links into the previous comment. So they do facilitate trade by ensuring that we do not actually import goods, all our goods, for example, from China, but that we rather produce it locally to create more work for our own citizens, as well as generate more income locally. And then they do actually also promote exports by giving incentives for people to start exporting goods and products overseas. SARS actually do also give a benefit to people that export. Okay, so let's move on to the budgeting process. Okay, so advise the Minister of Finance on all revenue matters. That actually falls in SARS to some extent can advise the Minister of Finance, but there's actually the Commissioner would actually also do that, Mangaliso. So it's not only SARS. So you have to look at the people within SARS as well and not generally SARS as a whole. Okay. Thank you, guys. I think based on the comments we've actually covered a lot of additional things. So if we take into consideration the protection or against illegal importation and exportation of goods, facilitate trade, those would also count towards the marks, Miller, for the 5 marks that they've talked about. Okay, so let's move on. How would you describe the budgeting process? Okay, so Estienne just said main point. So he said planning and forecasting, implementing, monitoring and controlling, and evaluating performance. Okay, so Estienne, that's a good structure to start off with. However, we need to give a bit more flesh and expand on those key points. Okay, so let's expand then on what you said. So who wants to add on to what Estienne's already included in there? How would you describe the budgeting process? If we start with, for example, planning and forecasting, what type of information would we have to collect in order for the budgeting process to work as it is? Okay, so do you guys want to elaborate, please, on, so Estienne gave us a wide overview or main bullet points of how he thinks the budgeting process work. Do you guys want to add on to that or expand on what he said? Okay, Mangaliso says setting policy, policies, estimating revenue, and setting upper limit on spending. Okay, so Mangaliso, you are touching on a few things. We will explain exactly how it works, but I first want to see what you guys come up with. Okay, anyone else want to add on how you think? Christine says we need to see where the budget is needed to be able to divide it. Okay, so that's also a valid point. Yes, you need to see what we will be spending money on to know how to allocate it. So that's correct, yes. But how do you think they know where to spend the budget? What type of information would they have to collect to be able to know where to spend the money? Okay, so Magdalene says looking at past budgets. Yes, you would also look at past budgets to see how much was budgeted, how much was actually spent, so that they overspent, that they underspent. Yes, you do look at the past budgets as well. What else do you guys think? Okay, so Tim Binkosi says when planning, they need to know how much money is available to spend. Mangaliso say look at current needs of different departments. Yes, we have to look at current community needs. Yes, compare past budgets to the goal. Okay, so that's very great points that you guys have listed there. Okay, so how the budgeting process works. We start off generally on a local, provincial, and then national level. So we look at each and every department. So your municipalities, your departments, then you look at your national departments. So each department, it's generally around September, October, they will actually create their budgets internally. So let's take, for example, a municipality. A municipality will create a budget. We call it the medium-term plan. So what they do there is they create a budget for the next 3 to 5 years. In that plan, they would generally list, okay, what is their main sources of revenue? So where will they collect revenue from? So if we take a municipality, for example, they would collect revenue from their rates and taxes that they collect. They might, for example, if they on-sell electricity, they will charge electricity, water, sewage, public sanitation. So the different sources of income they have. So they will list each and every source of income, and then they will assign based on the number of citizens that they have registered on their books. They will allocate, okay, we've got, for example, 2 million citizens in our sector, and we have a rate of 4 Rand, for example, then they will multiply it and say, okay, we've got 2 million people, each one will have to contribute 4 Rand, and we estimate usage would be, for example, 10 units, and then they will work out, okay, this is the revenue that we expect to come in. Then once they've listed their revenue, then they will say, okay, fine, this is the revenue we have. Now the expenses we have are the following. So what expenses do we have? We have salaries that we have to pay. So all our municipality staff will need to be paid. Okay, what services do we provide? Okay, we have to maintain the water pipes, sewage pipes. We have to maintain roads. Okay, we want to make our town or area look better, so they call it beautification. So we want to plant trees or put up some statues, whatever the case may be. So they then actually list each and every expense, whether it's capital or in nature. So they might even say, okay, we need a new lawnmower, for example, to cut the grass or whatever the case may be. So they then list this. And then they look at the end of the day, okay, fine, what is our income versus what is our expenditure? So do we have a shortfall or do we actually make a profit? Now, normally when you create a budget, the revenue you collect should equal the amount of expenses you have. Then what we do is we then submit this to National, and National then collates everyone's information together, and they look at what is the revenue we're getting in, what is the expenses that people require. And then they go and allocate it based on the size of each district. They will allocate an amount of money and tell you, well, you have to reduce your expenses by the following. So then they give them an updated budget. Then all of that information is collated, and that is then what the Minister of Finance talks about at the end of the day when he has his budget speech. And that's where the figures come from all these different budgets that have been consolidated. Then he will say, okay, fine, we need, for example, 2 billion Rand of revenue in order to fund all of these government spending that we require. What they also do is when they go through the spending, they will look at the past budgets to see, have you actually used what we've provided for you previously? If you have not actually used what they budgeted for you in a prior year, so you actually spent less, you lose that buffer, that additional spending in your next budget. So they actually reduce the amount of expenditure. So let's say they've allocated 500,000, I know it's very little, for you to make the area plant trees, and you've only spent maybe 200,000. Then that 300,000 you will lose in the next budget, and they will reallocate it to someone else that did not have sufficient funds for their spending. Okay, so that's how it normally works. Then the Minister of Finance will say, okay, this is how much money we need in order to cover all of that spending. And then they will tell you in their budget speech, now how are we going to collect that money from the public? And that is called your budget speech, where they then tell you the revenue sources, which is all your different taxes that they are levying. So sometimes they will increase the tax rate in order to increase the amount of revenue to cover the shortfall that is required. But because of how the economy sometimes look, they can't increase it too much because people are already struggling just to put bread on the table. So then what they will do is they will actually go borrow funds from overseas countries that have more than enough funds to cover the shortfall. But what that also means is it creates interest that we have to pay off. So somewhere in the future, that will mean that we won't be able to spend as much as we can. Okay, so that's generally how the budgeting process works. Okay, let's see what was the next question. Okay, so what do you think are the responsibilities of the Commissioner of SARS? So we've got SARS and then we've got the Commissioner. So what do you think the Commissioner is supposed to do? Okay, so Estienne says the Commissioner is responsible for developing a sound tax policy, Also shaping our fiscal legislation through communication with the Parliament. Okay. Anyone else? What do you want to add on? What else do you think is the responsibilities for the Commissioner of SARS? Okay, does anyone have anything else they want to add regarding the responsibilities of the Commissioner of SARS? Okay, so Mangaliso says responsible for the performance by SARS of its functions. Yes, Mangaliso, yes, he is. They are responsible for the specific performance. Yes, that's correct. Anyone else? Okay, so this serves as a CEO and accounting officer. That's correct. So they are basically the chief executive officer and accounting officer of SARS. So they are responsible for ensuring that there's good ethics that is practiced within SARS. So they would generally roll that out. They would also create, for example, different okay, let's quickly see. Takes all the decisions in the that's exercised by SARS of its powers. Okay, the Commissioner of SARS administers the act in terms of the administrative provision in the Income Tax Act and Tax Administration Act. Okay, yes, Saboko. Okay, so basically they are CEO. Now what a CEO does is they run the entire company. Okay. They need to make sure that policies and procedures are implemented within an industry or within the company to ensure that they actually deliver what they set out to do and that it's done in an ethical manner. Now, because of the fact as a CFO, if it's a big company, you cannot be everywhere and do everything. So you generally then appoint people underneath you. So generally your managers. Now, in this case, what he will actually create is he would create committees for specific functions within SARS. So he would have, for example, an ethics committee to make sure that the money is dealt with on an ethical manner and that everyone within the business actually follows specific ethical principles and practices. Then on top of that, as a CEO, you are also responsible for reporting on the financial information of a business. So that is where the accounting officer comes in. You are there to ensure that they do report their financial statements and that it applies with the generally accepted accounting principles, the international one, so IFRS, that you actually complete all your accounting and financial statements and that they are in accordance with these generally accepted principles and that it has been done. Okay, so Mangaliso also says must perform all the functions of the South African Revenue Services Act. Okay, so there are specific functions, that's correct, that he has to perform, but this is just like a broad explanation of sort of what he does. Okay, so that is what he will do. Now, the committees then have to implement these specific functions that he is responsible for and then provide him with feedback on that, and he would then go and report that back to Parliament regarding the functions and what have been done and so forth. Okay, then the next question. Okay, so let's quickly talk about South African tax system for the guys that haven't had tax before. So in South Africa, we actually use the resident-based income tax system, and that has changed since 2001. Prior to that, we had a source-based system. Now, what the difference is between source-based and resident-based? A source-based is you were taxed in the country where you earned your revenue or your income. But then what happened is a lot of South Africans started working overseas. And SARS realized, but listen here, I'm actually losing a lot of tax money because of the fact that I'm only taxing my South African citizens on sources in South Africa. Then they went and they changed it to a residence-based system. Now, what that means is if you're a resident in South Africa, you are taxed on your worldwide income. So I am taxed on income whether I earn it in South Africa, whether I earn it in the UK, Australia, America, it doesn't matter. I get taxed on it. However, if I'm a non-resident, so I'm actually living in a different country, so let's say I'm a UK resident, but I come to South Africa now and again to perform work here and earn South African income, I will only be taxed on that income that I've earned in South Africa and not on any other income. And that the taxes can come from either the direct or indirect taxes. We're going to discuss that a little bit as well. So our South African tax system, remember, it is residence-based, and that means you are taxed on your worldwide income. Okay, so that's how they changed it. Now we've already discussed what the purpose is of taxation, so I'm just going to skip over this. Okay, we've discussed the budget as well. Okay, one question I want to ask you guys. When we talk about the budget process, where do you think you will find all the information regarding how much money we require and where the money will be spent? So where do you think that information will be disclosed regarding the budget process, the expenditure and the funds required? Okay, so Etienne says from the yearly budget speech. Yes, in the budget speech, they generally highlight all this information. Now, let's say, Etienne, you were traveling. You missed the budget speech. Where would I go look if I missed the budget speech and I now want to know the exact amounts and figures? Yes, they do post the budget. Where do they post the information? Yes, Mangaliso, you can also look at the newspaper. They do also include it in the newspaper. So a newspaper is a source you can use, yes. Okay, so the government gazette could potentially be a source. Okay, SARS would generally publish all of that information on their website. They would actually post all the budget information for you there. And then National Treasury will also post the information. So SARS will focus more on the different sources of revenue, whereas National Treasury would generally post the expenditure information and the detail regarding that. Okay, so that is where you would generally find this type of information. And National Treasury would also generally give you graphs. So this is just the extract of SARS's website. So what they normally do is once the budget has happened during the year, they would list all the relevant documentation and links for the information in there. So if you've actually missed it, you would be able to find it on SARS's website, and they also give you a link to the National Treasury's website where they call it the People Tax Guides, where they give you the graphs with all the information in there. Okay, and this is what the information would generally look like if they summarized it, just to give you a quick overview of what is the sources of income, how much money will come from which source, and then the type of expenditure, where will the money go. Okay, so this is just for a bit of background information. Okay, so just to recap, what is the role of SARS? To collect all tax revenues, to ensure that tax and custom legislation have been complied with, and then provide a custom and excise service that help legitimize trade as well as protect our economy and society. So that's sort of the main role of SARS. Okay? And the commissioner, they are responsible for the stewardship of SARS's resources. So they need to make sure that whatever resources SARS have is being used for what it was intended. And they need to make sure that good governance is enhanced within the company by using their committees. Estienne, yes, I will put the slides up. Unfortunately, VC Learn became available a bit late during the week, so I didn't have time to upload it yet, but I will do it after the class today. So I will put the slides up for you. That is why I summarize some of this so that you have some of this when you study. Okay, I see it's actually 10 to 1, so let's maybe take a 10-minute break, then we'll continue just with the last few questions, and then we'll move over to VAT.